Welcome to the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership, the podcast that cuts through the noise to deliver real-world leadership wisdom from the front lines of business. I'm your host, Billy Duren, CEO, curious learner, and passionate student of people and performance. Whether you're leading a team of 10 or 10,000, this show is your go-to resource for creative insights that drive results and build people. Whether you're already in the CEO chair or you're just beginning your journey, this isn't theory, it's the nuts and bolts. Let's go to work. All right, everyone, welcome into the meeting room. Today, we're going to be talking about leadership. This is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. I'm the host, Billy Duren, and I want to welcome everyone back to the meeting room. I'm excited today to have Alex Moss, who's a co-founding principal at Praxis. Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Billy. I think you've had my colleague Ginny Vanderslice on, and we're big fans of you and the firm, and I'm really pleased to be here today.
Well, Alex advises employee-owned, nonprofit, and mission-driven clients in fully engaging employees to drive organizational performance. His expertise includes ownership culture, strategy, governance, leadership, workforce education, and engagement. And you can see me smiling as I'm saying all these things because you check all the boxes for our podcast, Alex. And Alex is also a trustee of the Employee Ownership Foundation, past members of the board of directors of both the ESOP Association and the NCEO. He has chaired the ESOP Association's professional advisory committees, both as fiduciary issues and on ownership culture, and served the employee ownership community in a number of other capacities. Alex also is current recent board members of 4 ESOP companies and chairs of 2 of those. So, Alex, I know how hard it is to get on your schedule. I know you're busy, and I appreciate so much you making time for us on the podcast today. So just to get us kicked off, tell us what's current with you and what it is that makes Praxis such a special place.
That's a good place to start at the beginning. I've been doing a lot of the things that our firm does. I just finished a coaching engagement with a CFO with one client, a guy that I really admire, who's really trying to lean into his own future leadership growth. And that followed on a board meeting for one of the boards that I chair. Attended the ESOP Association conference last week and started a succession planning engagement right before that. So that's a pretty good profile of the range of things that I do. I'm headed up to a brand new ESOP next week to help them announce the ESOP to their employee owners. Kind of a perfect ESOP fit, a company where it's the second generation owner and then his son who's active in the business, and they decided to sell to an ESOP because they really want to capture all those benefits that we all know and love of keeping the business locally owned and controlled and giving their employees a piece of the action. And I really, in our firm, as you know, Billy, we tend to work up and down the organization chart in ESOP companies. We don't set them up. We're not lawyers or financial advisors or administrators. We work on the organization side, the people side of the house. So that's everything from employee owner education and training at the front end to board governance, CEO succession. And then a lot of our work is in the middle of the organization on leadership development. And so I could speak to a range of those things. I think today we'll focus probably more on leadership and governance issues. But we're doing that because I think what we're really interested in at Praxis and what I'm really proud of is the focus on joining together. In principle, the name Praxis is a Greek word that means joining theory and practice. We have a lot of kind of frameworks behind the work that we do, but we're trying to operationalize it in a very practical way to do kind of 2 kind of outcomes. One of them is that American workers should have a piece of the action. The guy that invented the ESOP Louis Kelso said the problem with capitalism is there aren't enough capitalists, and we want to broaden equity ownership to more people in this country. So wealth inequality, we want to fix that by opening up the opportunity to more people to have it. And in our business, it's that kind of ownership sharing, but also the creating a workplace that's more welcoming and more productive and more, inclusive, and it gives people the opportunity to have a better work experience because they spend a lot of their waking hours in the workplace, and we want those waking hours to be happy and, not always happy, but healthy and productive and highly engaged. So, I think what makes us a special place is we're really interested in primarily employee-owned companies, and we also have secondarily a very important to us this practice with nonprofit organizations that are very mission driven, and we're very excited about the idea of involving, engaging people in that work, and then also in sharing the benefits with them. And ESOP is a fantastic tool for doing that.
Well, I'm excited to hear that you're going to introduce a new ESOP because the new employee ownership is still growing. The word is, it's really quite interesting. When we had one of our ESOP advocates meetings, one of our young ESOP advocates who had not been with our company very long raised her hand and said, "Why isn't everybody doing this?" And what a great question for a young employee owner to be asking. So Alex, I know that you and I can chase some rabbits here, but I'm really interested to come back to what you just said then about the wealth building component. So we've struggled a little bit. And I think sometimes in presentation of employee ownership struggles a little bit when you're talking about it only being a retirement benefit to a 25-year-old. For a 25-year-old, retirement's a long way away. So we've shifted a little bit to talk about wealth building. So how have you navigated that communication for that younger employee owner?
Sure. Well, if you were looking at me on screen, you would see that I'm no longer one of those younger employee owners. But I remember when I was, and I agree with you completely. I think the notion that you're doing this as primarily a retirement benefit falls flat for people for whom that seems awfully far away. And we're very committed. ESOPs weren't designed by Congress first and foremost to be retirement plans. They were designed to be financing and benefit strategies for companies. And then Russell Long, the senator at the time who installed them, put that into the retirement reform legislation. So we kind of have all these retirement rules, and we have to understand that that's what the ESOP is. And it gives us a lot of protections, a lot of hassle, but I think good hassle for the most part. But a lot of protections that other kinds of shared ownership plans don't have. And those prove to be really, really important. Still, that's not what the younger person cares about. I think what they care about primarily is having an opportunity to build their own mastery, to get good at something, to have autonomy, to not have somebody breathing down their neck all the time, to be part of a community. And anybody that knows Daniel Pink's work knows that I'm kind of paraphrasing some of his ideas about motivation, that we're trying to create environments where people will feel motivated to lean in and really work at their highest level and continue to learn. And my experience is if you have a crappy workplace, nobody's going to be happy and they're not going to stay anyway, ESOP or not. And if you have a great workplace, they're going to stay and they're going to lean in. And what's important to us is that when they do that, they should share some of the benefits that they're helping to create, because that's what's going to kind of turn around this big tanker that we have that is concentrating wealth. We all know it's too concentrated. And rather than taking it away from people that have it, which is one strategy, what the ESOP does is it provides opportunity for other people to build it, but they got to go and do that. And in order to do that, they have to feel welcomed and they have to feel challenged to do their best work. And a lot of our practice is about enabling that to happen. And then you need a certain kind of leadership orientation to do that. You need a certain kind of governance orientation to do that. So, what gets us out of bed is trying to stitch all those things together, connect the dots. I don't know if I'm getting at the question that you're asking.
You perfectly, because I was actually writing down the way that you've connected leaning in, engaging, and sharing. We had Daniel Goldstein on our podcast several months ago, and Daniel talked about, we need to move away from this fallacy of that employee ownership benefit is free. It's actually not free. They earned it. So connecting, leaning in, engaging, sharing / earning with the employee owners, I think goes a long way in helping the narrative come more real to our employee owners, as opposed to it being hey, in a long, long distance future, there's a pot of money out there when you get old. And I think that we oftentimes miss the opportunity to connect a little faster and a little closer to our employee owners. So we're going to be talking about leadership and governance a lot today. And one of the things that I love that you're being a part of our podcast, because you, what we call peeking the windows of a lot of companies. And on this podcast, we like to talk about leadership, not in theory, but in practice. We want to talk about what it actually looks like. So when it comes to leadership, in the big bubble that leadership is, what are some of the fallacies that you've come across that people, the concept, they think, well, leadership is this, but actually they've got it wrong? What's the fallacies around leadership?
Well, I'm not sure there's a one size fits all, but the thing that I would observe as true for me as anybody else, I'm guilty of not doing it right. And our staff in our firm helps me understand that. Anybody that's a parent knows that their kids will help them understand their own, imperfections. And I think your own people are pretty good at both aspiring and seeing the things that hold you back. And I think that's in the spirit of, we think that leadership is really about coaching and lifting other people up. It's about understanding where the organization's going, creating and articulating a vision, and then enabling people to help you get there. So if there is a fallacy in all that, it's that the leader's job is to tell people what to do. And there was a time where that was more true. And I think that time has passed us by, and that time is less and less true. The more that the success of the organization is a function of the humans and their motivation and their understanding and their ability to drive performance, the more the leader's job moves to creating a foundation that people can stand on. And that, you can't just turn people loose with no direction, because they want direction. They want to be guided on, this is where we're going. And they want to have some vision. And people are very motivated by that and hungry for it. But what they're not hungry for is somebody ripping them down and telling them all the things they're doing wrong. And again, I'll use these analogies are always a little dangerous because they can be insulting if you take them the wrong way. But anybody that's ever coached youth sports knows that if all you do is tell a child that's learning a skill what they're doing wrong, eventually they get fed up and they quit. But they want to do well. That's why they're there. And most employees also, they're not children. We're talking about adults, but they want to do well. And I think our underlying belief is that most people come into work in the morning really wanting to contribute and not slack off. And then sometimes our systems get in the way of that and eventually turn them off. And I'm not saying there aren't slackers in the workplace. You know who they are. But what I am saying is most people aren't wired that way. Most of the time, most people. And so our job is to put them in a position where they can see what they need to do, where they can get the obstacles out of their way. They can be part of identifying the obstacles and getting it out of their way, so that together, we can multiply our hands and get more done. So the leadership fallacy, if I bring it back to the original question, is that your job as a leader is to boss people around. And I think your job as a leader is not to disappear on people, but to get out of the way operationally and to help people understand the direction that we're going and align and support them in helping us get there. And people will do that if we encourage them and let them do it.
I love your sports analogies. I've got another one that I want to bring back up if I can remember it here in a few minutes, but I'm going to chase another rabbit for a second, because I agree with you 100%. I believe that there is a shift towards this, away from this demanding, do what I tell you to do type of leadership fallacy model into what we have today. But my question then would be a little curious, because I want to continue to be the curious learner here. What happened to cause that shift?
I think a lot of things happened. I think capitalism happened. Like our economy grew and grew and grew because there was so much opportunity in front of us in this country, in the world, but in this country in particular. Kind of growth got easy and we got a little sloppy. And I think we have a long labor and industrial history of kind of bosses and workers, and people get ingrained in that. And over a long period of time, for reasons that are very complex and, smart people could argue about, I think what happened is employees learned that boss's job was to create work and the employee's job was to do enough to get by and to try and make more and more money doing it. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's, at the end of the day, not that helpful when the economy stops performing. And our economy has slowed down and you could argue a lot of things about who and why and who to blame and point fingers at. I'm not here to talk about that, but what I will say is you can't really argue that we're no longer as prosperous as we had been. And so in an environment that's a little leaner, that's a little less, there's a little less fat, that I think it calls on us to really think about, well, how are we going to generate performance in a smarter way? And, and a lot of this thinking is around how do we get smarter by capturing the smarts of our people. And again, there's a lot of people that would say, well, that's great, but I can't count on a job. Why should I commit to the company? You're going to turn around and sell it out from under me, or you're going to move it overseas, or you're going to, the companies don't have loyalty. There's a couple of generations now with a lot of loyalty that has evaporated. And I think a few generations of people have watched that and said, why should I care about the employer when they manifestly don't care about me? And I'm not saying that's always true for all employers. I'm saying there is a real competitive opportunity for employees that want to engage their people to do that in a way that encourages them to return that loyalty. But we're kind of fighting a fight on that to convince people that we have companies that are worth being loyal to. We're going to earn that trust from you, and what we're going to expect back from you is a high level of performance. But in both directions, we've got to kind of rebuild some of that mutual commitment to building organizations together. And that's a hard thing to do. And here we are. We're all trying to do it.
And it's such an interesting subject when we talk about this shift, this mindset shift. We've actually watched it happen. We've watched it happen because we've acquired companies and we've come into companies where there wasn't this culture of engagement by leadership. And there's a lot of skepticism and can I trust you? There's a lot of that stuff.
Rightly so.
So overcoming some of that. And I was just thinking about that owner, that leader that shifts from, hey, this is what to do, and pivot to, hey, here we go. Like, here we go, moving from Iville to Weeville. And this is a team venture. And, because as a CEO, I believe my responsibility says, this is where we're going. Here's how we're going to do it. And here's your part. This is my responsibility. And this is what I do most of my day is in some version of those three things. And back to the coaching analogy, I've been around coaches that yelled from the sidelines. They yelled their players into position instead of coaching them during the week on where to be in position. They get to the game and just yell them into place. That's not coaching. That's not mentoring. That's not leading. That is just you being a loudmouth is all that is. So, I love the way that you said that. And I know over time we are seeing this shift and our company, I believe that there's an appreciation for being heard, being included, being part of the vision team, being part of knowing where we're going, what our culture, what our values are. That clarity around communication that Lencioni talks about. It's so important for leaders to be clear in their communicating their vision. So to shift a little bit from leadership to governance, I think I'm going to quote you right on this. I heard you once say that no one knows how to spell it or fully understands governance. But last week I heard that culture is defined by this is how we act around here. So is governance, Alex, simply as saying this is how we do business around here?
Yeah, well, I have a friendly amendment to that.
Okay.
Because I think you tell your people how we do business around here. Your board doesn't. And I think governance, the verb that I would use is not how we do business around here. It comes down to something pretty similar, but the way I would say it is governance is how we do oversight. It's how we monitor and make sure we're doing the right stuff. Because governance is the relationship between the people doing the stuff and the people monitoring and overseeing the people who are doing the stuff to make sure that the right stuff is getting done. And that's, so I would say, and it's going to get into some questions around boards and boards roles. A lot of times the governance role is get the heck out of the way, but don't get so far out of the way that you're not watching what's going on, because your job is to make sure, you are not, as a governance person, the coach on the sidelines. and you're not the owner up in the stands. You're the managing board in between the two who's making sure that our coach has got his head on or her head on and directing in the right direction. And when things go off the rails, it's not your job to jump in and fix the operation. It's your job to pull the manager aside and say, we're not on track here. What do we need to do to get back on track? And to make sure that you're giving your leaders the tools and resources and support. I had one of my favorite CEOs, and I'll just name him because he's a very inspiring guy, a guy named Donnie Romine, who was the longtime CEO of one of our really inspiring ESOP companies up in New England called Webb Industries. Every time you put a diaper on a baby or fly on an airplane with carbon fiber in the fuselage, you're utilizing a product that Webb Industries has sliced, packaged, and Donnie Romine's mantra, which I have adopted with or without his permission, but I love it, is that my board's job is to make sure I have the opportunity to earn an A plus. It's not to award me an A plus without me earning it, but it's to make sure that they and I agree on what good looks like, and that then they're providing the resources and support and the boundaries and the encouragement and the oversight to make sure that I get there. So I'm quibbling with words, but I'm doing it on purpose. I think governance this is how we oversee things to make sure they're being done right.
So, Alex, there's a book out there called, it's the Quotable Walt Disney. And I think there should be a book in the making of the Quotable Alex Moss. I have so many of your quotes written down. And I was thinking about you in a session. I was listening to you say boards should be, I hope I get this right, nose in, fingers out. And that interaction between the board and the executive team, talk a little bit about, if you would, that dynamic, so that meaningful dynamic that benefits the organization as opposed to this tension between these two forces, so to speak. Talk a little bit about what meaningful interaction looks like between the board and the executive team.
Sure. And I think it's analogous to any kind of oversight relationship with managers overseeing their employees. But it takes a particular form. And I should say that I did not coin the nose in, fingers out. That somebody much smarter than I a long time ago said that. And then one of my fellow board members at another firm had a kind of friendly amendment to that said, no, nose in and fingers on the pulse. Is the pulse beating too fast, or is it not beating enough? Again, it's this monitoring, oversight, jump in when you need to jump in, but generally help set direction and make sure that we're on track. I think that and there is tension sometimes because things do go off the rails, sometimes because our people mess up, but sometimes, and I think more often, because the market has a way of whacking us when we're least expecting it. And I think we're living through, depending on what business you're in, we're now in the late spring, early summer of 2025, and the market's kind of whacking us, and there's some politics behind that, and the market's whacked us at various points. And depending on the industry that you're in, you're going to get those, external things that hit you over the head, and they're not fun when they happen. I think that the general concept is the oversight, the board role is about getting, was it Stephen Covey or one of those guys who say, get the right people on the bus, get really, really smart, talented, thoughtful, visionary leaders in place, give them the resources, meaning the money and the tools and the other people that they need, make sure that they are capable of articulating a strategic direction. How are we going to grow this business? How are we going to make money, not just next year, but over the next 3 to 5 years and on into the future? Are we positioning ourselves to have a business that will thrive in the markets that are evolving around us? And that board management relationship is about, I think, primarily management setting direction through the CEO leading that process, but the CEO is not carrying all the water on that. They've got a whole team with them, and larger companies have teams of people. The oversight function, the board function, is to say, does that make sense? Can we stress test that? And can you convince us that your vision is really compelling and that we can get on board with that? And once we do, Our job is to support you in executing it and hold you accountable. If we're not on board with that vision, one of the boards that I sat on had a CEO where the rest of the board could see that the business model was really changing, and the CEO was very committed to the old business model. And the way I always describe it is we were headed, 60 or 70 miles an hour towards a brick wall, and he had his foot on the gas. And we just had to say, no, you can't do that. And either you're going to change the direction or we're going to change you. And ultimately, we had to, encourage him to sit in a different chair. The board cannot let the company hit a brick wall at 80 miles an hour. So when you see things going radically wrong, then the board's got to jump in and say no. That's really, really rare. It does happen. Every company has its challenges, but mainly what you're looking for is indicators of success and indicators of trouble. And let's steer ourselves over there. Let's steer ourselves away from there. And, there's a really broad set of questions here. I don't want to try and eat the whole elephant at once. I think the last thing I'll say, then I'll shut up and see where you want to take this. I think the board's also making sure that management's looking for those ripples in the ocean that indicate a tidal wave coming at us. Are they paying attention to what's going on out there so that we can prepare and take action in response to changes that are coming at us? So, there are times when we really truly get surprised because COVID emerges overnight in Wuhan, and nobody really saw that coming. But there are also times when you could see that things are overheated or that a market's changing, and management should be responding to that, and the board should be helping them look out there because you're busy day in and day out kind of running the darn thing. And our job at the governance level is to say, good, are you also paying attention to what's coming at us from outside? And even there, I think your sales teams and your people that are out in the market are a source of intelligence. And we want to be making sure they are selling stuff, but they're not only selling stuff, they're also bringing back smart wisdom, from the outside to tell us when we need to pivot. Easy to say, hard to do. Again, I'm probably moving off the original question that you asked, but there's this interplay between the oversight function and the execution function, and CEOs are right in the middle. They're doing both. They're articulating the vision, they're articulating the plan, they're getting their teams to say that, the board's signing off on it, and then they got to go lead the execution. And the board should be right beside them saying, attaboy, attagirl, keep at it, let us know what you need, until we see things that worry us that we don't think are accounted for. And then we ought to be pushing management to come back to us and say, well, how are we responding to this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking about a captain who's on the big ship and he's got his hands on the wheel and he turns around to his second lieutenant and said, drive this a minute. I'm going to walk up to the front of the boat and cast my eyes out to look for the ripple, so to speak. And that the board's responsibility is not to be the one out there looking for the ripple, but the board is responsible for saying, Captain, go look for the ripple. Make sure that you're looking for those things and come back and tell us what you're seeing. So I love these pictures that started coming into my mind as you were describing that. And we're going to jump into a little bit more of that. We're going to take just a real quick break and we're going to be right back. Alex Moss is the co-founding principal of Praxis, and we'll be right back.
Threaded Fasteners is a 100% employee-owned company whose mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. So, if you're interested in learning more about how we develop a people-centric culture, or if you're interested in a customized fastener solution, send us an email at culture@threadedfasteners.com. That's culture@threadedfasteners.com.
All right, we're back with Alex Moss, and we're diving in deep into leadership and governance today. Very, very interesting conversation going on. So, Alex, when it comes to governance, what are some of the swing and misses? What are we missing when it comes to governance issues?
Well, I think you can miss the easy things are in two directions: too little or too much. And one of the misses, the too much miss, is the board getting its nose in where it doesn't need to be. And what I mean by that is it's always sensible for the board to ask hard questions because that's their job. What you don't want them doing is then stepping into telling management what the fix is. And, that can feel a little weird if you're in management, you're getting what, they're asking these hard questions, but they're not helping you fix it. And I think that's the point. They should be asking the hard questions, and they shouldn't be helping fix it. They should be giving you the support to go and do that. And I think sometimes boards, people come from, particularly if they're very experienced managers and they sit on a board of directors, sometimes the tendency could be, well, this is what I would have done when I was in that chair. Why don't you go do that? And I think that question of, have you thought about this? Or how are you thinking about this? Or how can we help you think about this? And vetting it out is a really helpful thing to do, even if it's a little uncomfortable and if it involves a little push. When it gets to the point of, how come you're not doing this? That's when somebody's got to say, wait a minute, that's not our swim lane. If we're asking a CEO, how come they're not fixing something? We're giving them the resources and they aren't fixing it. We don't have a we need to fix it problem. We have a CEO competence problem. And we either need to put that person in a position where they can do it, or at some point we conclude they're not capable and we need somebody else in the chair. Again, that's extreme. It does happen. It's not commonly what happens, but the board needs to be ready to step in when the CEO is not ready, willing, or capable of responding. So getting in too far, too deep, too directive, I think, is one swing and a miss. And the other one is kind of, show up and, you're on the board and you're kind of on holiday, sleeping through meetings. And, I think anybody that's been through any kind of board training knows that, in an ESOP, you have some extra duties, but the core duties under state law, which is where the board management relationship lives, the duty of care and the duty of loyalty. Don't be self-serving, but the duty of care is the duty to be paying attention, gathering information, ensuring that you're suitably informed, digesting it, getting expert input where you need it, making decisions loyally in the best interest of the corporation, but carefully, with the appropriate level of information. And I think the other swing and a miss is people coming in and, opining without reading, having opinions without being informed, or not having opinions at all. If you come to a board meeting and you don't have opinions, why do we need you on the board? So if everybody has the same opinion all the time, why do we need all of them on the board? So you need this diversity. I'm expecting you'll come back to that question around diversity. You need a very rich diversity of thought, but once you have that, being good thinkers isn't enough. You need to be good thinkers who express that thinking and challenge management. And I think the other swing is sitting by idly, either when things are going well and not understanding it, or particularly when things aren't going so well and not helping suss it out and figure out what we need to do about it. So I'll come back again. Original question: where do you swing and miss? You're doing too much or you're doing too little. Sometimes that line is really hard to manage as a board member, knowing when and how far to step in. And I think it's a tricky thing that takes some experience and judgment, and we just all learn it our own way, I guess.
So, Alex, I've been in the fastener business. I've been doing this my whole adult life since I was 18 years old. And I could imagine if I was a board member on another fastener company, I would have a hard time not putting my fingers in, because I would be a subject matter expert, so to speak. So is it a challenge for those who really, maybe two different kinds of challenges? You have the one board member who doesn't really know anything about the business. He just knows about business, not that business, but just knows business. And then you've got the other with the subject matter expert that I could get down in the weeds. I'm a fastener nerd, quite frankly. So I could really get down in the tall grass in the fastener company. So how do you balance that component when you're selecting board members for good input, but hey, we don't need you out here in the tall grass chasing after the ball? Yeah.
Well, I'm going to give you the cop-out consultant answer. Not it depends, because that's never a good answer. But the other cop-out consultant answer is to say that we have a word for that. We call it judgment. I think when you're looking for board members, there's always a kind of a skills matrix. We need this skill set, this skill set, this skill set, and and Alex has this, and this person has that, and this person has that. But if you're selecting board members based on an Excel spreadsheet, you're going to get Excel spreadsheet outcomes. You have to do that skills matrix, depth chart kind of analysis. But at the end of the day, what you want on your board is wisdom, people who can process all of those things and together, come up with thoughtful input that's useful for management. So the example that I'll give you, because I'm very proud of this board, as imperfect as we are, as much of a work in progress as we are, I think we're a good board. It's an architecture firm where I serve, and I was the first independent director. And I told them when they were interviewing me, if you're looking for somebody who can tell you more about architecture than then, we're done here. Like, stop the interview, because if you spot me a few letters, I can spell it. And I think they had the wisdom to say, we're not looking for an architect. We have plenty of those. And what I brought, I think, is some thoughtfulness around governance, some depth around the ESOP, and some kind of overall insight around business and around consulting, some of which overlaps with their insight and some of which is quite different. But then when we went to look for a second independent director, we didn't need another of those people. We also needed somebody who could bring business wisdom, but we brought on the founder of a firm in a related industry who had built her own firm and sold it. And it brings a depth of BD and business perspective and contacts in the industry and all kinds of things that I could not begin to bring. And I think when the two of us step back and look at each other, she's constantly smiling and saying, I like the way you said that. I would never have come up with that. And I'm constantly looking at her and saying, boy, I'm glad you're bringing that insight, because I just don't have that. And so what I think you're doing when you're assembling any kind of governance model is you're putting together, in a board case, a portfolio, a group of people who together bring different kinds of depth and insight, but all of whom share a kind of general values alignment and orientation towards the company, because no one person is going to be the perfect oversight person. And we could take an industry. What is brilliant about the other board member in this firm is that she doesn't want to run our company. She has a lot of insight. She'll push and she'll cajole and she'll challenge the managers on things that I don't even see, because of her extensive experience in the business, running a professional services practice in that particular case. And I'll push them and challenge them on things. But at the end of the day, we'll both pull back, on a good day. We're not perfect at this. On a good day, we'll pull back and we'll say, okay, that's our insight. Now, y'all go do it, because now we want to know how to go. And I think that process has worked pretty well. We also have on that board, as many ESOPs do, a majority of internal directors who bring, kind of perspective and wisdom that neither of us as outsiders could possibly bring, because we just don't know the business. And I think the danger is either getting people, same kind of thing I said earlier, getting people that are too close, that can't step away from the practice, or getting people that are too far away and can't relate the experience that they have to the needs of the company in real time today. And, it's just you're looking for people with judgment who can bridge that kind of intellectually, who can bring to the board governance endeavor the ability to challenge, support, who can understand the business, but are not too insiders. Even the insiders are not there because they're experts. They're there because of their brains, because of their perspective that we really value. Makes us a better board when you add them all up together. Again, I'm wandering off the immediate question, so help me focus.
Actually, because several things that you've said, particularly when you're dealing with inside board members, internal, external, that dynamic is so, it's been so good for our company. When Lisa Tilley joined our board, Lisa helped us begin. The great wisdom that Lisa had, though, was she didn't take us from A to X. We went from A to A and a half to B to C. We slowly evolved into being able to put on our board hats. We didn't know how to take one hat off and put the other on, but Lisa's guidance has helped us now from that vantage point, now seeing it as a board member instead of seeing it as the executive team, because we were having just an executive team meeting in the boardroom, and we weren't separating those two things. But she has helped us evolve into a board, and now even now considering adding more diversity of thought onto our board and broadening our external perspectives is just going to help us continue to go forward. And so I'm very interested in the board executive team dynamics, and I think you have done an incredible job laying this out for us. And because of the effectiveness, it helps us to be a more effective organization when we have more vantage points as to how we see the world, how we see business, how we see individuals. All those things help us grow as an organization. So kind of pivoting a little bit, Alex, toward the AI conversation. There's not a conference I go to now, almost the keynote speaker is speaking about AI and the digital transformation that we're in the middle of. How is that coming into the world of governance and leadership?
Well, it's all the rage and everybody's having webinars on it, and I'm trying to wrestle with it myself. I probably have less wisdom on this than I have less wisdom on a lot of things. This is one of them. I think that the AI, operationalizing AI, is infusing into all of our clients and all the companies where I serve on the board or advise them, but also companies where we're advising on leadership and operational issues. The idea that you're going to automate and replace more replicable, processes where AI can take in data and spit out analysis faster than humans can do it. It's just going to continue to transform how we work. How does that play out in governance where there's so much judgment? It would be easy for me, and I would love to say there's too much human judgment involved. Don't worry about it. It ain't going to happen. And that would be foolish. And how that's going to happen, I don't know. But I am attending webinars where people are saying AI in the boardroom, what's going on? It's little minutia stuff like how do we build a board book and how do we synthesize analyses and how do we do some of the things that are very obvious AI kinds of tasks. I think the more interesting questions are, can AI, and I don't know the answer, can AI help us think about oncoming challenges? Can AI help us think about different kinds of scenarios and responses that we might have in a way that we wouldn't have thought of on our own? Because one of the hardest things to do for managers and for boards, I think, is really truly generative thinking about what's coming at us next. AI doesn't know anything about the future, but it's by definition, it can't. What it knows a lot about is patterns in language that are already out there. And a lot of those patterns are patterns that we don't naturally see or gravitate towards because we're all limited by our own individual experience. And so the question for me with AI is, how can looking at gobs and gobs and gobs of data way more effectively than I could ever do on my own help me recognize things that I wouldn't otherwise have seen? And that's what I'm hoping, but I'm not there yet. And there's probably somebody that's way smarter about it. There is. I just don't know who they are yet. I think I'm hoping that we can, use that power of looking at what's already out there to help us recognize things that might be coming at us that we wouldn't have recognized because our funnel can't be as broad. And AI can have a much, much broader funnel. The question is, how do you help it extract from that massive funnel relevant, useful information that you can act on? And, that's about enough of me saying, oh, yeah, it's one of those, I've probably said this to you in the past, the definition of a consultant is somebody who sheds light where previously there was no darkness. I'm kind of saying the obvious things, but I really think it's true. I think it's going to change how we practice, our organization development practice, and it's changing it, and it's changing how we're going to govern organizations. But I don't even see all of that yet. I'm hoping to get smarter as I pay more and more attention. We heard a guy last week at the ESOP Association conference, and his name is escaping me, Jim, the guy who founded Politico.
Yeah, Van Heidel.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
he was terrific. And he just said, look, and it's going to transform all kinds of jobs that you think are not transformable, and they're going to be gone in 3 years. And, get ready. And if you're not thinking about this, you have your head in the sand. I'm not quite as much of an alarmist about it, although I may get caught up and prove to be wrong. But I really think the challenge is to not get seduced by the idea that this is going to fix all of our problems, but to be really disciplined about what problems can it help us think about, and how do we actually go about incorporating it in. And I just don't have a lot of answers on that because I'm pretty new to it.
So, Alex, if you were to take right now, and I'm thinking about, there are biases built into every news presentation. So, if you turn on CNN and you turn on Fox, you might think you're living in two different countries because of the biases that come forward from the presentation. Yep. I'm wondering so for example, if you were to put in AI to tell me what the headwinds are for 2025 and 2026, if they could aggregate the data without the bias, will we be able to trust that this is a non-biased presentation? Because if we could, that would be a win. But I really believe that we are so innately skeptical about biases that all information coming to us now goes through our own filters of, can I trust this information? But again, take that all the way full circle as I'm the CEO of the organization. I'm wondering, can my employees trust what I'm saying? I want to be able to be someone who's trustworthy. If I say we're going to do this, let's show them that we're going to do it. So if anything we could extract from this part of this AI thing is, I want to talk about actual intelligence, not artificial, the intelligence that we have innately that we can communicate to our teams. And it goes back to this is where we're going. This is how we're going to get there, and here's your part in it. So I'm excited about the tools that are available. I think we are like many other companies. We're exploring how this can help us, but we're cautious about how this may trap us into some areas. So I'm really, really anxious to see how our team responds to some of the AI stuff coming at us. So, Alex, in one of our leadership meetings yesterday, I was talking with our COO, Jared Doberly, and we're always talking about alignment and how, if we're not careful, Jared even brought this analogy, you can be perfectly in alignment, hit a pothole or a curb, and you're quickly out of alignment. How do you work with organizations to make sure that alignment is intact?
Well, I think it's one of the core functions of executive leadership is to articulate who we are, what we're about, where we're going, and then to ask everybody else to cascade that down and align their efforts with that vision. And I think it has a really enormous implication for this whole conversation around diversity on boards. I think that the more voices and perspectives and life experience and backgrounds that you get into that room, the richer the discussion, the more creative the thinking, and the better you're going to be able to tackle any topic. And I would say the one thing where I do not like diversity is diversity of purpose. Because if you have people pulling at cross purposes, then all of their talents and intelligence and wisdom is dragging you in different directions. And you end up just wanting a referee of somebody to say, let's call the question, right? We're going to do it my way, even though you're trying to go over there and I'm trying to go over there. What we need for effective oversight and governance, what we need to enable the senior leadership team to get their troops in line, is to be able to say all of the board members agree on the values, the kind of purpose for which we are moving the organization forward. How we get there what the worries are, what the concerns are, who's going to get left out if we're not careful. All of that benefits radically, in a good way, from a broad range of inputs and perspectives and experiences. But if all of that is not aligned around purpose, then we're putting all of that wisdom to work trying to send the rocket in two different directions, and it's just going to blow up. So I'm not a big fan of diversity of purpose, but in almost every other respect, I think the focus on purpose is better served by having a broad range of perspectives. Same thing with management. Once you get that and you say, we're going here, now I want a lot of different opinions arguing about how to get there. And so we can agree this is going to get us there better is different from saying, I want to go there, whereas I want to go there. That has to get worked through and resolved. And I think for a board, and the classic element of that for an ESOP board is we are not trying to optimize quarterly earnings. We want to be profitable. If we're not profitable, we're dead. We're not going to be around very many quarters if we're not profitable. But our core purpose is not about quarterly earnings optimization, whereas it would be in a different kind of organization. We are not organizing the corporation to optimize its share value 5 years from now so we can flip it. A different kind of shareholder has that orientation, and they might be even better than we are at orienting the firm towards value maximization over that time horizon. We're also trying not to be sloppy and say, well, because we're not going to sell the firm in 3 to 5 years, or because we're not, being evaluated on quarterly earnings, therefore profit doesn't matter, right? No. It matters. What matters is that we do this in a sustainable way so that we're generating performance today that's replicable over the foreseeable future. And I think that idea in an ESOP, you need leaders and you need board oversight that recognizes why that kind of share ownership is different than other kinds of share ownership, so that we get people who are oriented towards that kind of outcome rather than the other kind of outcome. And one of the things I have seen on boards with diversity of purpose is people, all they want to do is put the company in play because that's what they did with their last one. And, or all they want to do is something that we're not about. And so I'm really cautious about that. I think it's a good argument to have, but then we got to resolve it so we can all move forward with a vision of where we're trying to take the company.
And the only way to resolve that is to have meaningful candor and transparency and clarity, that whole trust, good judgment, all those things that you've talked about kind of all come together. We have 3 pieces that we talk about. The description of our long-term vision is scalable, sustainable, perpetual. And what you just helped me write down, I want our purpose to be perpetual stewardship. So we want to be good stewards of not short-term gains for long-term jeopardy. We want it just the opposite. We want to be not so concerned about the short term as long as we have the long-term stewardship, that perpetual stewardship in mind on our decision making, because that's what we're trying to create. We're creating a company for the next generation of owners, not to flip it to, that's never been part of even any of our conversations. So Alex, as we're kind of winding up this, and we ask this of all of our guests, speak to the young leader. We've been talking about governance leadership at a very high level, but we've got a lot of people in our organization that tune in. Hey, what about me? I'm on my leadership journey. I'm just getting started. Think back to young Alex. What would be your words to encourage young emerging leaders? How do I get started on this leadership journey? What would be your words of encouragement to them today?
Yeah, I think as with everything else, there's this balance between being pulled in 2 directions, and you have to do both. One is get really good at what you love doing. Because if you're really good, you're going to be able to add value, and you're going to be somebody that your company wants to keep and advance and put into successive levels of leadership in the organization. Get really, really good. And part of that for me, of course, is not only are you mastering your position, that's another Lencioni mantra is, mastery of position. not only are you doing that, you're also mastering the leadership skill of coaching and building up others. So, those things kind of go hand in hand. The tension is while you're busy looking down at the work in front of you and plowing that ground, or whatever metaphor we want to use, and getting really good at your job, as a young leader, you need to periodically stop and look up and ahead. Where is our leadership taking us? How can I help us? How can I challenge us, but also sometimes learn that they can see things I can't see, but maybe I can help them see things that they're not seeing. How can I get my vision up so that I'm connecting with carrying our organization forward? And we need our young leaders to feel like there's part of our future that is completely dependent on their intelligence and their foresight. So it's this balance. Everything, a lot of what I have said has to do with managing the balance between two poles that we're trying to do both. And you're trying to look in and get really, really good, but also look up and help us imagine where we're trying to take this thing. Because the better that you can help think about that and align with it, the happier you're going to be contributing to it. And there will be times when somebody looks up and says, that's not for me. I don't want to be in an organization that's going there. And what I would say to that person is figure that out. And if you can't figure it out in a way that is compelling to you, figure it out somewhere else, because you're not going to be happy, and we're not going to end up happy with you if we can't satisfy that kind of. People want growth. They want to be able to see their personal future success in the organization. And it's really healthy sometimes for people to come to the conclusion that that's not here, because what I'm envisioning isn't where the organization's going. Mostly what we want is to keep those people around, advance them, and make sure that they can see themselves here. But in those cases where they can't, it's better to kind of know that and get busy fixing it. So look up, look down, and get the balance of that. It's never going to be a perfect balance. It's never going to be 100% clear. You have to be doing both.
Two things on that. One, that's part of our language. We talk about heads down and heads up work. Two different kinds of work, working
Great.
in your business, working on your business. We love talking about that. But I will say to those young leaders, if there's something that you're seeing, maybe that's, I'm not sure about that, or I'd like to know more about that. Don't run out the door. Ask somebody, what am I seeing here? Maybe
raise your hand.
Yeah, maybe give me a little more clarity on that. So, Alex, listen, I think you are one of the giants in our industry. I think that you are so full of wisdom. I'm so happy that you're part of the employee ownership community. I think that you are doing great things. From the first time we ever met, I have books of notes from being in your sessions. What a valuable time for our podcast. But for all those that are tuning in, I just want to say thank you for what you've done. But this time today has been huge for me. One thing I can tell you about a podcast, when I start listening harder and I just lose track of what I'm doing, I mean, you had me leaning in today, and that's really good for me. And I think you'll have a lot of people's attention on the things you had to say. So thank you again for spending some time with us today on the podcast.
I appreciate it. And I'll be really curious. Your listeners are going to, find things that you and I are saying that resonate, and they're going to find things that they don't see the same way. And I think that's where the learning is for all of us. And so I would encourage anybody who has a reaction to anything that we said to tell us. The same way we would say with other leaders is let us know, because that's, how we all learn is by being challenged. And I hope we'll get some of that too. It's a privilege to be with you. And I really thank you for, opening the door for me here.
Well, I know that I've got 3 pages of notes. So I've got a bucket full of nuggets, to walk away with. So Alex, we'll catch up soon. I'll probably see you in an airport somewhere soon. So thank you for being with us.
I'm sure we will.
All right. I'll be back with just
you.
A few closing thoughts in just a minute. What a great episode with Alex Moss. Perfect way to put a bow on our 50th episode. Congratulations to the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. So many people have been a part of this. Johnny Gwynn, thank you for what you've done. Haley Gibson, I couldn't have done it without Haley. We're looking forward to the next 50, but it was really special to have Alex Moss. Alex brought so much wisdom in leadership and governance. I mean, I've got all these notes on here, but I really love what he said at the end. Get really good at what you're doing. Put your head down at times, then make sure you pick your head up. But get really good at what you're doing. It's a great nugget for us to walk away with. So until next time, tighten up.
Thank you for joining the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, brought to you by the employee owners of Threaded Fasteners. If you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe to, rate, and review the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Do you have a leadership story to tell or a question to ask? Email us at podcast@threadedfasteners.com. That's podcast@threadedfasteners.com. This show is made possible by our family at Threaded Fasteners, Inc. Our mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. Interested in learning more about TFI and how we create value in our team, in our communities, and in our customers? Visit threadedfasteners.com. Thank you again for listening. I'm your co-host and producer, Haley Gibson.
And I'm your host, Billy Duren.
This show is edited and produced by Johnny Glenn and our friends at Deep Fried Studios.